Could you imagine a place where history meets the future, where continents converge, where tradition embraces modernity, where ancient streets lead to cutting-edge skylines, and where... Okay, I've run out of really cool ideas, but this is Istanbul. And I gotta say, I don't think I've ever been to any other city that seamlessly integrates 2,000 years of history into modern-day society. On the high side, you have beautiful and high-ceiling mosques that tourists can enter outside of prayer hours, and then on the quieter parts of the street, you have the freshest pomegranate and orange juice you'll find anywhere on this planet. Speaking of planet, let's talk about where on this planet we're flying today. Istanbul has two major airports in its region, Sabiha Gökçen, which is meant for more regional flights and low-cost carriers, and then the main Istanbul airport, which is where we're flying out of. This very large airport has 5 concourses. The G concourse is used strictly for domestic flights, whereas the other 4 concourses, the A, B, D, and F concourses, are reserved for the international flights. And as we'll see in just a few moments, your pre-departure experience is going to involve quite a lot of walking, but the airport does a really good job of streamlining the whole process. And from here, we get on a plane for about 10 hours and fly all the way to Chicago. Sitting on the southern tip of Lake Michigan, Chicago is the 3rd most populated city in the US. It's also home to a very large airline, and it's also a really cool city, so as you can imagine, there's quite a lot of leisure and business traffic that the city gets, and hence you end up with a behemoth of an airport like what we have here. Chicago's O'Hare International Airport, or as I like to call it, OHEL, is home to 4 different terminals, and Turkish Airlines arrives and departs from Terminal 5. This is the same terminal that's used by all airlines for international arrivals into Chicago, so even United Airlines that uses Terminal 1, all their international arrivals are into Terminal 5 where all the passengers will offload here, and then the plane will get towed back over to Terminal 1 where their departures are from. Let's bring it back over to the other behemoth of an airport that we're flying out of in Istanbul. Guys, this airport is beyond massive. I can't explain to you how big this is, and this is simply just the entrance. We haven't even gone inside yet. The airport has a number of different entrances, but door number 5 is what's used for business class passengers as well as elite status holders on Turkish Airlines. You'll be able to differentiate this entrance from the rest of the entrances because of the sleek black premium branding that Turkish uses. Once you enter the airport, the first thing you'll run into is a person whose sole purpose is to make sure you're a business class traveler. And then after that, you have the general pre-check to make sure that everything you're bringing into the airport is either halal or righteous, depending on which of Turkey's 2 main religions you follow. Once you complete that security check, you're dumped right in front of the check-in counter where once again, you have a business class check-in counter and then also a Miles and Smiles check-in counter. They're both identical. Hello. Now, as far as business class check-in goes, there's actually 2 separate lines that you can use. The one that I went into is for most flights. However, our flight actually is not supposed to be checking in here, and I was redirected to a different line. If your flight is going to the US, the United Kingdom, or Canada, there's actually a separate special line all the way to the end that you're supposed to use for check-in. Once you finish check-in, you're conveniently let out right in front of a priority immigration lane for business class passengers as well as elite status cardholders. Remember, I said this airport is super large, however it is relatively streamlined for the most part. The pre-departure experience has been virtually identical for business class passengers and Turkish elite members. However, this is where we diverge paths. Turkish actually has 2 identical lounges that are pretty much a copy-paste of each other, the only difference being one is for business class passengers and another one is for elite status members. The lounge did have a conveniently placed entrance for any passengers with disabilities, however for the rest of us, we had to wrap around until we reached the entrance on the other side. Once we reached the lounge entrance at the bottom, there was actually somebody there checking our boarding passes, and I didn't understand why given that there were e-gates and additional staff members upstairs. Are you happy to see the self-scanners? Well, you shouldn't be. You see, hold on to those boarding passes tight. You'll need them every time you want to scan in and out of the lounge. That's right, even when you're leaving the lounge you need to scan your boarding pass to actually exit, just like this guy did, so make sure to have it handy with you at all times. Before we get into the lounge review, I should point out that they do have the walking time to each of the gates here, so keep in mind because your gate could possibly be very far. Turkish's lounge here in Istanbul is pretty big, but it's got a lot of awesome features, so I'm going to try and cover everything as fast as I can. Here we go. Nice open entrance room with seating, Casper the Ghost playing the piano, more seating, but with a seizure, Champions League memorabilia room, playing FIFA on a Boeing 787 business class seat, more seating, more racing around Istanbul, more seating, but in cursive this time, more seating, golf simulator, luggage storage, private seating, and a nice shower room that you can book for free. There's also nap rooms, but your layover has to cross a certain threshold to be able to book them. Whew, that was a mouthful, but if you thought that was a lot, well, here's an express version of all the food. Condiments, meat, rice and garbanzo beans, koftas, feta cheese, vegetables, salads, more salads, soup, pasta, Turkish bagel, heart attack, coffees, rice, lentils and chicken, baklava, Turkish cookies, more baklava, fistik dolma, tulumba, more fistik dolma and tulumba, beverages, gozleme, more kofte, grilled veggies, pide and lahmacun, teas, fruits, biscuits, and a wine cart. Speaking of wine, I definitely deserve a glass after all that. But the important takeaway is that this lounge has every possible amenity you could ask for and a great variety of food. Very, very well done by Turkish. The other thing to take away is that don't forget your gate could be very, very far away. The funny thing in all this is covering the lounge actually took me a lot longer than I expected, so by the time I reached the gate, boarding had already begun. There is also a secondary security check at the gate, presumably because this was a US bound flight, but there was a business class and elite status section that you could use to get through the line faster.
Yani üzerine inap etiketi atmıştık, onu da
Hello.
öptük zaten.
Can I see?
Yes, sir.
İlginiz olsun.
Çalışmada sorun yok. Sağ olun.
Let's take a moment to acknowledge the cabin itself. Turkish's 777 sits in a 232 layout in business class. That's right, you could literally be sitting in a middle seat. That just simply will not cut it today. This seat is great if you're traveling with someone you know, but if you're flying alone or you need a 10-hour break from the person you love, you certainly won't be getting it in this cabin. Now the business class cabin spans across 7 rows in this aircraft, with 4 of them being in the first cabin and another 3 being in the second cabin. Row 4 also has misaligned windows just in case you like sitting at a window seat. This flight ended up being quite a last second booking for me, so the only window seat I could choose was the very end seat 7K. And as you can see, the only seats with direct aisle access are truly just the aisle seats. The seat controls were a little on the old-fashioned side, but quite intuitive, and there was a spacious center console which my neighbor took full advantage of. And below the seat was a conveniently placed headphone jack as well as a USB-A port. Don't worry, the headphones are coming. Now I know I've had a lot to say about this seat, but the truth is there is a decent amount of legroom and storage space that doesn't bleed into your leg space, which is something a lot of the business class seats of today's day really can't say. However, the seat's screen was a little bit more antiquated and could only be controlled by this remote, which could be found off the side of your hip, which is also right next to this conveniently placed power port. Okay, amenities. The bedding was honestly pretty basic, with just a simple pillow as well as a thin blanket. There was really nothing separating you and the seat. There were slippers, however, which I really appreciate, as well as a place to hold your shoes. The headphones, they come great, they work great, but you had to return them at the end of the flight. There was also an amenity kit. We'll be looking at the contents of this later. The crew did eventually come around with pre-departure beverages, and the choices were water, orange juice, or strawberry lemonade, and I definitely chose the last one, and it was honestly really sweet but still tasty. And speaking of tasty, there's no doubt that Turkish Airlines is well known for its onboard catering, and so here's a look at the menu for today's flight. We'll be looking at this for the next minute and a half, so feel free to skip around as you feel. began our journey to Chicago today by flying out over into the Black Sea and crossing over into Bulgaria, at which point the service began for our flight. The crew gave us beautifully presented hot towels, and around the same time they also took our drink orders. Now, I promise you I'm not doing my best France impression, I just don't like hot towels, I prefer them cooled down. In anticipation of Turkish's amazing food service, I got my tray table ready to go. You kind of have to open this lever and then out comes the tray table. It might take a little bit of pulling to get it outside of its holder, but once it's set up, you have a fully functional table that occupies quite a lot of space. It's also adjustable, you can push it forward and backward as you need. Given that our journey was underway, now is also a perfectly good time to change from my shoes over to the comfortable slippers that Turkish Airlines provided us. Now I have to say, even though the crew were efficient, they weren't particularly friendly or personable by any means. I had very minimal interactions with them and they barely even smiled at me, to be honest. Moving along, her flight started off with a glass of Takeoff champagne, which is about $60 a bottle, and a bowl of warmish nuts. Pause. After that was done, the crew set up our table and got us ready for the more main part of the service. The really cool thing about Turkish Airlines is that they also have this onboard chef concept, which to me is really just theatrics more than anything, but it's cool that there's somebody there dedicated to making sure that you enjoy what you eat. Which in this case began with appetizers. The way it works with appetizers is that they roll a whole trolley around with all the different apps you can choose from, and in my case I had chosen the spring rolls, the seafood salad, the smoked salmon, as well as the hummus. You also had the option to choose a tomato soup with this, which in retrospect I probably should not have chosen, but it was too good. It was very flavorful and it even had a mild kick to it, which was really nice. And as far as each of the appetizers go, the cheese rolls were honestly okay. They were flavorful, but they were lukewarm more than anything else. The hummus was good, the seafood salad was perfectly good as well, and the smoked salmon was excellent. But at the same time, I'm also a smoked salmon addict, so is it really excellent? Our main course today was, as the menu describes it, a grilled fillet of salmon with spinach, watercress mousseline, whatever that is, chateau potatoes, whatever that is, and some pesto sauce. And for an airplane fish, it was honestly really good and flavorful. And for dessert, I indulged myself in a cheese plate, a specific type of baklava called kadayif, and a fruit plate. Just like appetizers, dessert comes around on a trolley and you can simply choose all the options you'd like. As soon as the first meal service wrapped up, the crew laid out all the snacks and drinks that would be available throughout the flight. Now, look, I'm a shameless person and I am proud to call my bathroom at home my kingdom and my throne. However, this Turkish Airlines bathroom was also not too shabby. It smelled good and it just had a good vibe overall. Around this time, the crew were also bringing out bed covers for everybody that wanted them and even offered to turn down their seats into beds, which is always a great service to offer. For the time being, I declined since I wasn't ready to sleep yet and I told them I'd do it myself later. The seat does turn into a fully flat 180-degree bed, and even though the seat itself isn't too private, it's definitely a little bit more private when you're in a lay flat position. And as you saw earlier in the flight, Turkish Airlines does provide a reasonable amenity kit. It may seem basic, but it has everything I need, and I'm not much of a skincare on a plane type of guy, so I don't really need most of these items. A short while after I woke up, the crew were already setting up the cabin for the second meal service, so I went and quickly brushed and got ready to go. To start the second meal, we had a caprese salad, which for me personally is a mixed bag. On one hand, I really love cheese, but on the other hand, I can't stand tomatoes. But for what it's worth, this was really fresh overall. And for the main course, as soon as I saw traditional dolmas and karnıyarık on the menu, I knew I could not say no to that. For those that don't know, karnıyarık is a traditional Turkish dish that's basically an eggplant stuffed with minced vegetables and ground meat. It was damn good on the ground in Turkey, and it certainly did not disappoint on this flight either. And last but not least, we had a humble profiterole, which is essentially a cream puff, except this time it was also covered in chocolate. It was simple, light, sweet, delectable, and I really couldn't have asked for much more. Before I forget, we also did have Wi-Fi available on the flight, and it's actually even free for business class passengers. Once you connect to their Wi-Fi network, you go to tkwifi.net, And from here you can click around until you find the option for business class. I think there's also a discount, or maybe it's even free for Miles and Smiles members. Not exactly sure on that one, but as a business class passenger, you click on the business class login, and there's an option for you to enter your last name and seat number, and you're all good to go from there.
Chicago and is ready to land over your airport at 5:25 p.m. local time, according to latest reported weather, straight partly cloudy and temperatures 20 degrees Celsius. On behalf of Turkish Airlines and crew, I wish you a nice landing. Thank you.
As soon as we began flying over Lake Michigan, I knew we were in the final stages of our flight. For the next time we touched land, it would be right over Chicago. And so as we get close to the end, this brings me to my final thoughts on Turkish Airlines as a whole. Starting all the way with the ground experience, as big and gigantic as Istanbul's airport is, I think Turkish does a great job streamlining the ground experience. You have a private entrance, you have a private check-in counter, which leads directly to a private immigration line, as well as a private security checkpoint. The whole pre-departure area experience is really good for business class passengers. And then after that, you have one of the best lounges anywhere in the world, having a wide range of food options, a little bit of drinks, and a little bit of something for everybody. Honestly, that lounge is really well done, and I commend Turkish Airlines for what they've built over there. And then we get to the onboard experience part of it. Now, the seat on the 777 is really out of touch with time. However, this is not their only long-haul aircraft. They also have A350s and 787s that have far more modern and far more private seats in a 1-to-1 configuration. So take that aside, the food on board Turkish Airlines is all world class, some of the best food you'll find anywhere in the world on an airline. And so when you take all of those things into consideration, I think Turkish Airlines is one of the best business class products in the world if you're not flying on this particular aircraft. If you are flying on this aircraft, then your business class experience will overall be pretty good, except maybe not for this seat. But if you have one of those newer 787s or A350s, this is truly a stacked product top to bottom, and you'd be lucky to have the privilege to fly it.